Corporate media control public opinion with a finesse rivaling Baryshnikov. It's done with monopoly control of mass communications and a large supply of rhetorical methods used to manipulate the public. Needless to say, this is not the best arrangement for a democracy in which people need reliable info to control the government. The situation these days is off the rails. The public are deluded by a tangled web of media lies, and the elite are plundering the economy and the environment like there's no tomorrow. So it's more important than ever to understand the deceptive methods in use. That is, if we're to bring society under rational control. That's the purpose here, to describe the rhetorical tricks, emotional levers, and bald-faced fucking lies in constant use in mainstream institutions. The whole set are described in detail in the Big Book of Propaganda, and there's a link for that in the description. These are just a few examples. The basic device is repetition, and it's a simple one. Repeat anything more than once, and some people will believe it. Repeat it without challenge over many years, and the majority will be hypnotized by it and blind to the facts. It doesn't have to be factual or logical. It doesn't even have to make sense. Contrary information might rain from the sky and roam the land in herds. It all bounces off people whose minds have been shaped by a recording. As it turns out, repetition is hypnosis, and the major themes are familiar to everyone. One is the free market, a one-dimensional fantasy concealing the actual economy. That's the mixed economy, also known as social democracy. It's a practical system with a fascinating history. It's described in another video and more completely in the book. The free market, on the other hand, has enjoyed a marketing campaign going back decades. This is without a peep of empirical info allowed in the media or university. By now, the public are so brainwashed by it that they wouldn't recognize the real economy if it flew in the window on radiant wings. An ironic example is freedom of speech, which gets name recognition from the First Amendment. But in a media environment dominated by cash, the amendment is useless. It only prevents government from controlling speech. That doesn't stop money from putting in its own 2 cents. Before the internet, the entry fee for public speech was always financial power. But corporate interests still control all institutions, including the net. And they're working like the devil to manage social media. Thus, freedom of speech is an illusion unless you happen to own a media conglomerate. The counterpart to repetition is cherry-picking, anecdote, and the exclusion of data. On the one hand are falsehoods repeated endlessly and without challenge. On the other is the exclusion of contradictory facts. Together they define speech in the corporate domain. Cherry-picking has many forms. Also called a half-truth and error by omission, every corporate narrative is missing essential info. And ignoring inconvenient facts is the journalist's stock in trade. Sadly, this goes for most college grads who've been trained to overlook unpleasant info reflexively. Though I've placed critical facts both here and throughout the book, the masses are too used to the simplistic version to recognize them. The result is a maze of storylines with strategically placed gaps, shredded narratives that are of no use to anyone. But that's only the beginning. The media also exclude counter-arguments. So while conservative news repeated fantasies about stolen elections and threats to freedom from microchipped vaccines, liberal media responded with brie on a soggy baguette. This is the standard liberal practice of bringing sugar cookies to a gunfight. Also, Trump's sedition was described as his refusing to concede the election. His legal team was an embarrassment. It was also undemocratic, hypocritical, and indefensible. Conservative media were vaccine hesitant and vaccine skeptical. These are all abstractions and nowhere close to a counter-argument. The last two are actually complements. The correct response was obvious. 5 minutes to get a vaccine doesn't curtail freedom. The U.S. already vaccinates the public against many diseases. The goal was to stop the virus, save lives, and get the economy back on track as quickly as possible. The freedom claim was typical of mainstream pundits. They really mean freedom without responsibility. And the speed with which the vaccine was developed was a marvel. Likewise, the Stop the Steal campaign was not undemocratic or hypocritical. It was fraud, sedition, and an attempted coup d'etat. Such plain language and a few well-placed lawsuits would have shut down the operation before it gained traction. Of course, none of these arguments were made by corporate liberals. An everyday example is the set of cooking shows on cable TV. They feature cream, sugar, cheese, processed grains, and chemical-filled meat, with everything deep-fried in high fructose blubber fat. This is great for agribusiness profits. It's also toxic for human health. Luckily for Wall Street, the public don't notice missing facts, even when half of them are blimping out like walruses. Another device is hype and flattery. After 50 years of their constant use, the public can't face any unpleasant reality. They need to have everything whitewashed and sugar-coated. Another is the plausible falsehood, and this one is super effective. The trick is to invent a description or explanation that seems correct but isn't. It works because it can't be challenged in the corporate bubble. And since it's delivered with a pound of flattery, the public swallow it hook, line, and cheesecake. The purpose is to conceal a harsh reality with a believable fiction. So corporate liberals fell off of their tuffets, explaining the rise of Donald Trump. Supposedly, the Russians did it through the magic of social media. As if a few internet bots can compete with the media's daily flood of BS. Or Trump served up Christian utopias which were more effective than the standard lies of politicians and somehow not compromised by his sexcapades. Or the public were annoyed with the elite and easy prey for Trump's celebrity or idiocy or demagoguery or great oratory skills. That these claims were contradictory didn't stop respected pundits from throwing them around like confetti. Again, corporate spokesmen can't be challenged even on their craziest fabrications. Because it all sounds credible, the real reasons never got within a mile of the public square. One was the establishment's 40-year betrayal of low-wage workers. That started with the globalist agenda mentioned earlier. Another factor was Trump's co-opting of two populist issues, outsourcing and open borders. This was another Republican bait and switch. Trump made a couple of symbolic gestures on the issues, then swapped in supply-side policy faster than a cheetah on meth. And their voters fell for it yet again. If the day ever comes when Republicans see through the scam, Mount Rushmore will do the hokey pokey and turn itself around. Meanwhile, Democrats lose elections because of gerrymandering or campaign finance or the Electoral College or foreign interference, not because of their own corruption, crackpot social theories that alienate 4/5 of the population and support for half of the elite agenda. Likewise, socialized medicine is said to be inefficient, and it is to a degree. It also covers everyone and doesn't bankrupt anyone. These are huge social benefits, and by cutting out the profits of drug and insurance companies, the network would be much more cost-effective. That's something that Republicans pretend to want. Needless to say, none of these minor details ever make it into the media narrative. A recent example is the explanation for inflation. Supposedly it's caused by congressional spending bills. This is without a shred of supporting evidence and put forward across the media spectrum, from Fox to MSNBC and network news. It shows the collusion between media outlets. And of course the real reason, monopoly control of production, isn't mentioned. That brings us to the very worst example. This is a hybrid of a rhetorical trick, emotional lever, and one of the foulest treacheries in history. It's the divide and conquer meme, sugar-coated these days as the culture war. The program started in antiquity and has been the main protocol of corporate media since the 80s. At the time, cable channels were turned into soapboxes for Christian fundamentalism. Mainstream Christians have always been banned from TV because humane values are a threat to financial elites, and fundamentalists are happy to scapegoat minorities and demonize their fellow citizens. Yet even 24/7 fundamentalism was not enough. Militant atheists like Marr, Harris, and Dawkins were published in hardcover and produced on the silver screen. The objective was to divide liberal Christians from liberal atheists. They share an ethical system that's one of the main challenges to corporate ruthlessness. So they had to be divided, not only henceforth, but also forthwith. Cable news became a hyper-partisan nightmare, with every problem blamed on the opposing party. The university featured crackpot social and economic theories, free market and supply-side ideology, fourth-wave feminism, intersectionality, critical race theory, and cherry-picked history. It was cultural sabotage on the grand scale, worse than Real Housewives on a methadone drip. The tactic was placed in American institutions by multinational corporations. This is not the brainchild of activists. Rather, it's produced and directed by college professors, liberal and conservative journalists, and corporate managers under the direction of global finance. It reached its height in the last few years with seditious and anti-vax propaganda on right-wing cable, wokeism jammed into media and corporation, and flaccid commentary from the liberal media. The project has killed many birds with one stone. The anti-Western, anti-Christian tropes confuse and demoralize liberals. Bizarre social theories send working people running for the hills. The culture war tricks liberals into supporting globalism and Republicans into supporting supply-side policy. It has also brainwashed the college crowd, who are now beyond the reach of logic. Most importantly, hyperpartisanship conceals the issues. By setting the public at each other's throats, it distracts attention from the class war policies of the last 50 years. These are only a few examples of a much larger supply of deceptive methods. Others include moral panic, misplaced emphasis, generalization, diversion and distraction, and political theater. There are many others. The entire bunch would choke a hog. After 70 years of this outrage, the population are trapped in a maze of delusion. It's a state in which reality itself is buried in pretense and fabrication. As noted by Merleau and elaborated by Jung, Paine, Bonhoeffer, and others, this is menticide, an attack by the ruling elite on the very minds and sanity of the public. Now, when the economy is being plundered by corporate monopolies, the government remains under the control of a global elite, the environment is teetering on the brink, and the media are lying through their teeth about every issue under the sun, it's more important than ever to understand the deceptive methods in use in our institutions. The whole bunch are explained with descriptions and examples in the Big Book of Propaganda, and there's a link for that in the description.